Welcome back to Pen to Pod, a writing podcast created by a writer for other writers. Every other week, we have author interviews, and on the weeks in between, we have solo episodes like this one, where I talk about different aspects of writing craft that I'm interested in. This week, we are talking about setting and how to make setting more atmospheric and think of it as a character instead of just a place. Hope you enjoy. I have to be honest, when I come up with a story, setting is one of the last things that come to mind. I usually get the premise first alongside the mood and tone, then come the characters, but where they are comes later. Setting, though, is an integral part of a story. It not only tells us where we are in time, but where we are geographically. Even though setting comes to me almost last in the ideation process, it's a part of the story that I do an entire edit on after my first draft. When writing a first draft, and I'm experiencing it again now, I can sometimes get stuck in the white room syndrome, meaning I may set up where my characters are, but as actions progress, that fades away, and it just becomes two characters in a white room having a conversation. This is easy to do when you just think of setting as a place, which I do in the beginning. And that's why today we're going to look at setting as a character. Eudora Welty, an American novelist, said, "Every story would be another story, and unrecognizable if it took up its characters and plot and happened somewhere else. Fiction depends for its life on place." When coming up with a setting for your novel, or if you already have a setting but maybe you're trying to connect it more to your story, it's important to think about how the setting adds to the atmosphere, the themes and conflict, and the characters. A good example of setting that adds to the story is in Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Deonn went to UNC Chapel Hill for school and received 3 degrees from there. After spending so much time on campus, she had her debut novel, Legendborn, set there as well, which follows a 16-year-old as she navigates a secret society on UNC-CH's campus. As said in an interview of Tracy for Culture magazine, Deonn does not shy away from incorporating a well-developed and thought-provoking commentary on the role of higher education institutions in upholding the racial hierarchy. And I believe that she does so the best through her setting of the book at UNC Chapel Hill. Here's what Deonn herself had to say about choosing UNC-CH as the backdrop for her debut. "I always knew I wanted the story to take place at a university in the South, because secret societies thrive in those settings, and the ancient Arthurian secret society I was creating would need a place to hide in plain sight. I also wanted to incorporate the setting because questions of memory, place, and legacy are in the air in those spaces, and in particular at UNC, the oldest public school in the nation and a place I know very well." First, let's talk a bit about what Legendborn is about, and then let's talk about how the setting of UNC-CH adds to the atmosphere, theme, and the characters. This is taken directly from Goodreads and the back of the book. After her mother dies in an accident, 16-year-old Bree wants nothing to do with her family memories or childhood home. A residential program for bright high schoolers at UNC Chapel Hill seems like the perfect escape, until Bree witnesses a magical attack her very first night on campus. A flying demon feeding on human energies. A secret society of so-called Legendborn students that hunt the creature down. And a mysterious teenage mage who calls himself a Merlin, and who attempts, and fails, to wipe Bree's memory of everything she saw. The mage's failure unlocks Bree's own unique magic and a buried memory with a hidden connection. The night her mother died, another Merlin was at the hospital. Now that Bree knows there's more to her mother's death than what's on the police report, she'll do whatever it takes to find out the truth, even if that means infiltrating the Legendborn as one of their initiatives. She recruits Nick, a self-exiled Legendborn with his own grudge against the group, and their reluctant partnership pulls them deeper into the society's secrets and closer to each other. But when the Legendborn reveal themselves as the descendants of King Arthur's knights and explain that a magical war is coming, Bree has to decide how far she'll go for the truth and whether she should use her magic to take the society down or join the fight. Okay, so now that we know more about Legendborn, and again, if you have not read this book, please go do so. It is one of the most immersive books I've read in a very long time, and I cannot wait to read the sequel. So how does UNC Chapel Hill add to the atmosphere of Legendborn? Tracy Deonn said it herself. She needed a location where a secret society could hide in plain sight, and where better than the oldest public school in the United States that has a long history and a deep fondness for legacy. UNC is also a college, which sets our story firmly in the academic world. So already you could put this into like a dark academia book. But the reason why is because the world of academia gives this story an atmosphere that has the illusion of freedom, which is college, right? The illusion of freedom. You go somewhere without your parents. You are seemingly on your own for the first time. While in reality, it is a world with unspoken rules, discipline, and high expectations. How does UNC Chapel Hill add to the themes or the conflict of Legendborn? There are quite a few themes in Legendborn, but I'm going to talk about one that I think is the most obvious, which you could already probably get from just from listening to the description, which is legacy and the importance of history. There's a scene where Bree gets to see this giant wall that shows the lines of each knight, stretching back to the 6th century when the Arthurian legends were first born. This book surrounds a secret society that stems from Arthurian legend, which means 1,500 years of secret knowledge passed down from generation to generation. What Bree thinks when seeing this wall says volumes. I'm going to read from that now. To be able to trace one's family back that far is something I have never fathomed. My family only knows back to the generation after emancipation. Suddenly, it's hard to stand here and take in the magnificence of the wall, and not feel an undeniable sense of ignorance and inadequacy. Then, a rush of frustration because someone probably wanted to record it all. But who could have written down my family's history as far back as this? Who could have been able to, been taught to, been allowed to? Where is our wall? A wall that doesn't make me feel lost, but found. A wall that towers over anyone who lays eyes on it. When we are thinking of setting, UNC Chapel Hill is intertwined in the stories of the United States colonization from British settlers. It also has a deep history and legacy of racial discrimination. These thoughts are reflected in the Legendborn secret society. Being set here is so important because in the story, especially in the beginning, Bree is an outsider coming into this society. She feels like she doesn't belong, but she wants answers. And she's feeling she doesn't belong for many, many reasons. The setting amplifies that. But what's important here, and why legacy and the importance of history is a theme, is because Bree discovers history and legacy of her own. One that is not as well documented as the Legendborn, or as organized as the Legendborn. But this legacy opens up whole new possibilities for Bree to carve her own path. So this moment with the wall is very significant, and her reflections on it are very important. Not only for what Tracy Deonn is trying to say through this story, but also for what's to come next. The wall is significant in this scene in and of itself, but if it was placed somewhere else, if this story was set at maybe a newer school, one that was set in the middle of a bustling city, so there weren't any older buildings, but instead newer, almost high-rise buildings interspersed in the middle of the city. You know, there was only a small space for a designated campus, but all the other buildings were scattered throughout the city blocks. That is a completely different setting. Yes, it's academia. That setting rings true, but that type of college is so different from UNC Chapel Hill. I just don't think that the weight of this story would carry if it was set in a newer college dispersed throughout city streets. No, a story about history and legacy needed to be set at a college steeped in history and legacy. How does UNC Chapel Hill add to the characters of Legendborn? There are so many ways that setting bolsters the characters and their conflicts, but let's focus on our main character, Bree. Bree loses her mother, and as a result ends up going to this program set at UNC Chapel Hill. Her mother was also a UNC Chapel Hill alum, which really adds conflict and tension to her being there, and Bree trying to live up to her mother while also grieving the loss of her. This ties Bree to the location in more ways than just being there for a program. There are now stakes involved for her. Being able to do well in this program and being able to go to college here, just like her mom did, is now really important for Bree. This also reflects back to this theme of legacy and the importance of history, which is reflected by UNC Chapel Hill's own legacy and history. Do you see where I'm going with this? Your overarching setting doesn't always have to be the setting that has these character-like properties. It can also be the locations within that setting that your characters visit. For example, where your character is could reflect on the character's thoughts or mental state, or even become a metaphor for the current conflict that they are working through. Not every single location that your characters go to have to have a deeper meaning. Let's be clear. But let's be even more clear. How your characters react and interact with the world around them can reveal a lot to the reader, and I personally feel like it should always be present. For example, your main character enters a coffee shop. They hear the hustle and bustle of the city life around them, and they slowly move forward in line and wait to order. How they react in that setting can tell us a lot about the character and their current state of mind. Are they overstimulated and in a bad mood? Maybe they're focusing then on the high-pitched whirring noise that the espresso machine is making, just adding to their annoyance. Maybe they're in a rush, so the line of people feels like a sea of people, never ending. Maybe they are thinking about their relationships, or they're coming from a scene that impacted a significant relationship. So they could be looking at two lovers canoodling in a corner, or watching two friends laugh and almost spill their drinks, right? How your characters interact with their environment says a lot about them, their current mental state, and the story. So how do we talk about setting in scene? It's easy to do what we just did and extract setting in an analytical view and see how it connects to atmosphere, themes, conflict, characters, etc. But it's also important to remember to talk about setting when in scene. One thing that can happen when writing is what I mentioned earlier that I do quite a lot in my first drafts, and I'm doing now, I know, is the white room syndrome. It's when two characters, they might be performing an action or a dialogue, and then once that happens, where they are seems to melt away, right? They're no longer somewhere. They're kind of in this ether. It's important to ground your characters in the world around them, even if the scene and setting don't have a bigger impact on the book's atmosphere, themes, or conflict. A great way to do this is to go back to the basics. The senses. Have your characters use their senses. What are they tasting, feeling, seeing, hearing, smelling while they're in the world around them? Where a character is can be woven in like strands of a tapestry to make the bigger picture of the scene. Let's look at an example, and I'm going to take a portion of the opening chapter of Legendborn. So if you're sitting somewhere and listening, maybe try to take notes. Take notes on when the setting jumps out at you. What do you feel like it's doing in this scene? And then I'll talk about that after this excerpt. A Carolina first year sprints through the darkness and launches himself off the cliff into the moonlit night. His shout sends sleepy birds flying overhead. The sound echoes against the rock face that borders the Eno quarry. Flashlights track his flailing body, all windmilling arms and kicking legs, until he hits the water with a cracking splash. At the cliffline above, 30 college students cheer and whoop, their joy weaving through the pine trees. Like a constellation in motion, cone-shaped beams of light roam the lake's surface. Collective breath held, all eyes searching, waiting. Then the boy erupts from the water with a roar, and the crowd explodes. Cliff jumping is the perfect formula for Southern white boy fun. Rural recklessness, a pocket flashlight's worth of precaution, and a dare. I can't look away. Each run draws my own feet an inch closer to the edge. Each leap into nothingness, each hovering moment before the fall, calls to a spark of wild yearning inside my chest. I press that yearning down, seal it closed, board it up. Okay, so I want to take a moment to talk about just those portions of setting that we get right at the beginning. We open the scene with this sentence that I'm going to reread for you. A Carolina first year sprints through the darkness and launches himself off the cliff into the moonlit night. We instantly are getting UNC Chapel Hill embedded into this story because the first year student is being described as a Carolina first year. So we are already seeing how important the setting is for this story. This sentence also describes the action of a student hurtling himself off a cliff. But it is so ominous. When I first started this book, I had to reread the first paragraph because at first it sounded like something horrible happened, only to realize that this is actually a tradition that all first years do before the start of school, and everyone is cheering, so it's actually a good, fun thing. This is a great example of a way that setting is establishing tone and atmosphere. It shows that people and places are not always as they seem, which is important to this story. We also start our story off campus, but on a night that is steeped in tradition, also important to the story. We are in the woods, in a quarry with a cliff. Students are abound. We also see a way that Deonn instantly relates where our main character Bree is to her surroundings. When Bree is watching these kids jump off the cliff, Bree is thinking, I can't look away. Each run draws my own feet an inch closer to the edge. Each leap into nothingness, each hovering moment before the fall, calls to a spark of wild yearning inside my chest. I press that yearning down, seal it closed, board it up. We get a great sense of Bree's mental state here just by her reacting to what is happening around her. We know from the prologue that her mother is dead, and we see now that Bree has this wild yearning, she says, inside of her for something, to feel something, right? But she instantly presses that emotion down, sealing it up, closing it away. So we are seeing that Bree is suppressing her emotions at this time in the story, and she will continue to do so, for a little bit at least. Then there's a couple paragraphs I'm going to skip, and I'm going to go to a couple paragraphs later in this first chapter. During the day, the Eno River State Park is open for hiking, camping, and kayaking. But if you sneak in after the gates close like all the kids here have, it's probably too definitely trespassing. Not something I'd normally go for, but Charlotte explained that the night before the first day of classes is special. It's tradition for some juniors and seniors to host a party at the quarry. Also tradition, first-year students jumping off the edge of the cliffs into the mineral-rich lake at its center. The park straddles Orange and Durham counties and sits north of I-85, about 25 minutes away from Carolina's campus. Charlotte drove us here in her old silver Jeep, and the entire ride over, I felt Alice beside me in the back seat, shrinking against the illegality of it all. The jumper's unfettered laughter crests the cliff before his head does. I can't remember the last time my laugh sounded like that. You don't like this because it's, I dropped my voice into a dramatic whisper, against the rules? Alice's dark eyes burned behind her glasses. Getting caught off campus at night is an automatic expulsion from EC. Hold up. Charlotte said a bunch of students do it every year. Another jumper sprints through the woods. A deeper splash. Cheers. Alice juts her chin toward the other students. That's them. Tell me why you want to be here. Because I can't just sit in our room right now? Because ever since my mother died, there's a version of me inside that wants to break things and scream? I lift a shoulder. Because what better way to begin our adventure than with a pinch of rebellion? She does not look amused. Did someone say rebellion? Charlotte's boots crunch through the leaves and pine needles. The sharp sound stands out from the droning background of crickets and the low bass thump pulsing her way from the party's speakers. She comes to a stop next to me and brushes her auburn ponytail away from her shoulder. Y'all jumpin'? It is tradition. She smirks. And it's fun. So we also get that quick paragraph, right, where Deonn is describing where we are, which is Eno River State Park, in more detail and connects it back to the tradition at hand. Deonn also does this amazing job of reminding the reader where we are and building that immersiveness around the characters as they partake in dialogue. So when talking about White Room Syndrome, again, this can happen as characters start to engage in actions or dialogue, but then the writer stops mentioning the setting and they just kind of float around in the ether. But Deonn reminds us where they are and what is going on around them in the middle of conversations multiple times. So in between Alice, who's Bree's best friend, and Bree talking, she interrupts the conversation by saying, another jumper sprints through the woods, a deeper splash, cheers. And it kind of pulls us as the reader back to the jumping off the cliff, reminding us what's happening, and then back to the conversation again. Kind of like scenes in a movie where characters are talking, but then it might pan to something else and then cut back. We see this again happen when a third character comes over, Charlotte, and as she does, Deonn takes a moment to explain how this character interacts with the environment. She says, Charlotte's boots crunch through the leaves and pine needles. The sharp sound stands out from the droning background of crickets and the low bass thumping pulsing our way from the party's speakers. So even just having the characters interact with the setting that subtly is so good. It reminds us where we are. It creates that immersiveness feel, and it makes the setting more lifelike. The setting has such a huge role just in these opening pages. 1, it establishes the tone and atmosphere for the book. It also very quickly establishes the importance of legacy and history from sentence 1, which again is a huge theme in the book. It allows Bree to reflect on how she's feeling on the inside and where her current mental state is. And it creates an immersive experience with splashes, boots crunching, and the background noise of crickets. Setting can be more than a place. It can become a part of the story that is alive, allowing the reader to become fully immersed in your book. I encourage you to play around with setting in your own work, as well as the next time you pick up a book, hopefully Legendborn if you haven't read it yet, and really focus on how the author describes and uses setting. Now I'm going to leave you with a couple writing exercises to help you. So Ursula K. Le Guin, which if you do not know who that is, please also go pick up their books. She has a writing book titled Steering the Craft, and in it she mentions an exercise where you are to describe a character by describing any place inhabited or frequented by that character. Give us evidences that build up into a consistent, coherent mood or atmosphere from which we can infer the absent person. A mere inventory of articles won't do it, and will bore the reader, so every detail must tell. So Le Guin is emphasizing that you should not describe any action or people during this scene, just the setting. And she says, this is the stage without the actors on it. This is the camera panning before the action starts. So this really allows us to have a location tell us about a character. Describing a place that they inhabit or frequent, that gives us evidence of who this person is. And like she said, a mere inventory of articles won't do it. You have to have every detail must tell us something. Another exercise that can enhance the connection of character and setting is to do what I described with the coffee shop. Have your main character enter any location you'd like. Write about how they interact with that location using their senses and how their mood affects what they are seeing in the space around them. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode all about setting. It's something that I have been thinking about a lot lately in my own first draft, so I thought it would be good for myself to explore it and share that with all of you. I'd love to hear about your settings for your books and how you are thinking about it in terms of atmosphere, theme, conflict, and character. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow the podcast wherever you are listening to us. If it's on YouTube, you can subscribe to my channel at Mick Writes, or hit the follow button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Just by hitting the follow button or subscribing, you won't miss an episode and you'll get notified every time we drop one. But it also helps other writers like you find us. Speaking of, if you have any writer friends that you think could benefit from another writing podcast, please share it with them. I really like creating this podcast, and I'd love to eventually really have it just be the author interviews and focus on that. But in order to continue doing this, we need listeners. So please share this with your writer friends and let them know that Pentapod drops weekly episodes all for you guys. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great writing week and keep on writing.